If you believe everyone, no matter where they live, deserve a place to call home, you're not alone. On Housing for Good, host Chris Goodson and Karolyn Moore explore housing solutions from McPherson to communities across Kansas and beyond. We bring you stories and insights from housing experts, policymakers, and people who are making a real impact. Join the conversation. Listen wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, iHeart, and more, because housing isn't just local, it's universal.
Welcome to Housing for Good, a podcast dedicated to housing topics and issues affecting our communities in McPherson County and beyond. With years of experience and expertise, hosts Chris Goodson and Karolyn Moore discuss housing challenges and opportunities with other experts from a variety of housing fields.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Housing for Good. I'm Karolyn.
And I'm Chris.
And today, Chris, I'm super excited about this particular podcast.
Are you
because
excited?
David is on the East Coast.
You're always excited about every podcast.
Well, I know, but
This one's especially cool because he's on the East Coast.
he's on the East Coast,
well,
yeah. We're branching out.
I know, right?
So, David, tell us a little bit about your background and then explain to us what led you into engineering and building systems.
Sure. Well, thank you. You know, I'm not a very cool person, but I'm glad being on the East Coast kind of helps anyway.
It helps a lot, yeah.
Okay.
We're in the middle of Kansas, so you know.
Okay. Yeah. Very, very different. Well, I'm here in Queens, New York.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Where I was born and raised. And to answer your question, I studied engineering in college. And when I was getting ready to graduate, I was looking for jobs back in New York, where I was from. Mm-hmm. And the jobs I kept seeing for mechanical engineers, which is what I studied, was HVAC in buildings.
Okay.
You know, HVAC being heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems in buildings. Now, when I studied mechanical engineering, it's not a subject I really ever thought about, you know, HVAC systems. It wasn't on my radar. But when that's all I saw in New York for mechanical engineering jobs, I started looking into it, and it actually became very interesting to me. You know, at the time, this was kind of early 2000s, around 2006, 2007, and energy efficiency in buildings was becoming a really big topic at that time. And HVAC systems are major consumers, the biggest consumer of energy in buildings. So, you know, it was actually important at that time, you know, to be working on that. And it seemed really interesting to me. So I just kind of dove in, started my career as an HVAC engineer working on buildings here in New York, and spent most of that time working on new, fancy, you know, buildings, you know, shiny skyscrapers, things like that, you know, the type of stuff you might think about in New York. And went, you know, the first 10, 12 years of my career doing that sort of thing. And it wasn't until around 2018, 2019 that I really had my first exposure to working on an old existing building and working on how do we actually upgrade a building like this? How do we actually modernize a building like this? You know, in New York, we have lots of really old buildings. In the early 20th century and the mid 20th century, we had these big building booms, you know, a lot of multifamily housing that was built in that time. And all those buildings pretty much are still here. So I realized, you know, working on new buildings is great and, you know, it's important, but like the real challenge and the real way to have an impact is to figure out what are we going to do with all these old buildings that, you know, you can't just throw them out and get new ones. You know, we're kind of stuck with them to some degree, and we have to figure out what we're going to do with them. So I figured that's a good challenge for me to work on and to focus on.
So you answered our second question was, what did you see? And you just answered that. Well, what you saw was older buildings. And also, I've never been to New York. I got to tell you, it's on my bucket list. Super excited about potentially going there next March. But it's also very cold in New York, isn't it? Isn't your weather? I don't know about what summers look like, but I always thought winters were pretty cold. So that had to have been that has to be a big consideration as well, is trying to figure out not only these older buildings, but this weather that you have.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, so our climate here, it gets pretty cold in the winter. It could get down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit in the winter, so it's pretty cold. In the summer, it can get pretty hot. Just last week, I think it was up around 100, 101 degrees and quite humid as well.
Oh, wow.
So we need, we have serious heating needs and serious cooling needs.
That's a big variance between 0 and whatever, 100.
Yeah.
That's a big variance
Yes.
of something that you're going to have to figure out and to keep energy costs down and keep those old buildings.
Okay, so normally when we think about HVAC, you come in and you put in a new heating and air system, one that's more energy efficient. What led you to create Hydronic Shell? What exactly do you do?
Good question.
Yeah. What is
that? So I mentioned this building that I got exposed to. It was a pretty large public housing building. It was around 20 stories. There's probably 300 apartments in it, built in the early 1970s. And a building like that has old infrastructure. The facade is old, in poor condition. We just talked about heating and cooling. Oftentimes buildings like that don't have sufficient heating. It gets quite cold in the building in the winter. They often don't have sufficient cooling or no cooling at all in the summer. So conditions are not good from that perspective. And then the last piece of it is ventilation. So a lot of these buildings actually don't have proper mechanical ventilation to bring fresh air into the building. So the indoor air quality in a lot of these buildings is a real problem. I was working on this project and really seeing the impact that it had on the people's lives who live in the building, not having sufficient heating, not having cooling in the summer, having this poor indoor air quality that's really affecting their health. And all of the kind of solutions, and the reason it was so hard to fix this problem is because, people live in these buildings, and to really fix it, to really upgrade the infrastructure, it's kind of like performing invasive surgery. You have to, there's all these ducts and wiring and pipes behind the walls, and going and fixing all that stuff while people live in there is so difficult that it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
And that's a big reason why.
Yeah, and then you're trying not to disrupt them, right? Are these typically low-income complexes where people have, a lower income and more fixed? Is that what you typically are working on right now? That lower,
yes, exactly.
That lower end. So that does make it a lot more difficult because they just can't go move out. They have nowhere to go more than likely.
Yeah.
So that's really important. So it'd like having surgery and then having somebody pop in and out of the room or something while you're trying to
recover.
Or you're trying to do this. So how is this different?
Yeah, they don't want some random contractor coming in. There are trust issues there. There's a lot of challenges there. And so basically the innovation that I'm working on now, what's new, way to solve this problem, to answer your question, what is Hydronic Shell? What are we doing? It's basically a way of installing that infrastructure that the building needs, but installing it on the exterior of the building. So you install it on the outside so that you can have people living in the building, doing what they do, and having the work occur on the exterior of the building so that you're having a much more minimal disruption on their lives. And that, to me, was one of the keys of how you can really make these kind of retrofits possible. Is we need to figure out how to do it from the exterior so we can be less disruptive. So
is it like insulation? I'm in my brain, I'm looking at Karolyn because I'm trying to imagine what this is. I mean, are you spraying something on the outside of the building because you're fixing the windows and the insulation? Is it also doing something for the heating and air system? Or is it just So explain kind of a little bit what that is as far as exactly. I'm trying to picture this in my mind. I mean, I'd love to see a photo of it, I think, to try to figure out what you're talking about.
Yeah, if I'd known you'd be on video, I would have had some visuals to show you. But it is, so insulation is a huge piece of it, or the facade of the building. So these buildings, which in New York are typically these old brick buildings, and the brick is in very poor condition. It's leaky, water is leaking into the building, causing all sorts of problems. It's very expensive from a maintenance perspective to kind of keep repairing the brick and things like that. There's no insulation, all these issues. So part of the solution is a new facade for the building. And the way we address that is by putting a new facade essentially on top of the existing facade. So prefabricating, in a factory somewhere, prefabricating these insulated facade panels with windows already in them. And you ship them to the site and you basically attach them to the exterior of the building. So you're covering up the existing building with this new facade.
Okay.
And that's something that we certainly did not invent. That's something that I wouldn't say is common, but it's certainly been done. It's been done a lot in Europe, a little less so here in the United States, but it's kind of a somewhat established way of retrofitting the facade of the building. But what was really unique about our approach is taking all that HVAC infrastructure that we talked about, which is there's pipes involved, there's ductwork involved that's moving fresh air around the building, and the equipment that actually provides the heating and cooling into the building, and putting all that into the facade as well. So if you look at what's happening,
I'm trying to figure out. It's like a panel. So what is the panels made of? Are they stucco? Are they like a wood or like, I don't know, what is our siding made out of that we have on the tiny homes?
It's an extruded plastic.
Right. Are they plastic? What does that look like exactly? I'm trying to, because I know I'm very visual.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what that would be. So what is that panel made out of that you're attaching?
Yeah. So the panel, so we're talking about mostly mid-rise and high-rise buildings in New York City, which have very strict code requirements in terms of fire safety and the materials that you can use. So we're not making them out of wood. But essentially what the panel looks like is it's a steel structure that kind of looks like the steel stud structure of a wall that you would see in any building made out of steel studs. So the steel studs form the structure of the panel, and then attached to those steel studs is a layer of insulation. It could be 3-4 inches, depending on how much insulation you really need or want. And then there's some kind of cladding on the exterior of that insulation. So that's what you'll actually see is the cladding. And the cladding, really the insulation and the cladding can be made of lots of different things. That's kind of one nice thing about the approach is it's flexible. There's not one product we can use. There's lots of different products that can be swapped in and out depending on what kind of look you want or what kind of budget you have or things like that.
Okay, so now I'm picturing the building with the Superman exterior on it.
What? Superman exterior.
Yeah, kind of like a suit. Okay,
Yes,
so are you finding then that you're able to tackle the ventilation area where you mentioned getting air into the building? Is that something else that you're able to do with that form that's on the outside of the building now?
Exactly. So if you imagine, if you're trying to make a visual here, imagine you're putting this Superman suit, this shell on the exterior of the building, and up on the roof, you're putting a new ventilation unit. So you're putting a piece of equipment that takes fresh air and it filters it and it tempers it, and it supplies it with ductwork down to all of the apartments. And that ductwork is running within that new facade, within that outer shell.
Okay.
So it's almost.
Have you just done this on one building?
So we haven't done this on any buildings yet.
Okay.
I started working on this in 2020, and originally it was kind of getting the technology ready. So a lot of R&D, prototyping, testing, that sort of thing. And then we had our first pilot project in Syracuse that we were working on. And, a project like this is not a cheap kind of project, putting a new facade on a building, all this new infrastructure. So there were a lot of grants that were funding that work for this building in Syracuse. But unfortunately, with the election in 2024 and early 2025, all our grants kind of fizzled, all the federal grants kind of fizzled away. And so the project had to go on hold. So unfortunately, we don't have any actual deployments of the technology yet. We're building a small structure now that we're working on in Albany, New York, that will actually be the first demonstration of the technology on a real working building.
Okay.
I don't know why anybody wouldn't want this, because you could do it single family, multifamily, big buildings, high rises. I mean, I could imagine you could do this with any building. Would that be correct?
Well, it's the easiest to do on a building with a simple geometry. Because, when you're putting this new skin on the exterior of the building, the simpler the geometry, the better. And one thing about this public housing we have in New York City, when you visit in March, I'm sure you'll see a lot of it. It's these kind of rectangular blocks, whether the building is 5 stories or 20 stories, they're kind of these very simple geometries. They were built to be very cost effective in their construction. So they're pretty simple geometries. And so that's really ideal for what we're doing. So our intent is to start with those kinds of buildings with the simple geometries. And then as we get better at that, slowly move on to other types of buildings that maybe have slightly more complex geometries, like a single family home or a 2 or 3 story kind of townhouse. Though they tend to be a little more complex in the shapes of the buildings. They're not just perfect squares or rectangles. The idea is to start with the simple geometry, really get good at it, and then expand to more complicated geometries. But to answer, your question, why wouldn't everyone want to do this? Ultimately, it comes down to cost. So it's not a cheap intervention, and that's ultimately the big problem, or one of the big problems we have with our aging building stock, is we have all these old buildings, and there's no cheap way to solve that problem. There's no kind of quick intervention where you're going to take this building that's 100 years old and come in, spend a little bit of money, do something quick, and all of a sudden you're going to have a nice modern building. There is no solution like that. So the cost is what becomes the challenge. Now, what we've done is reduce the cost compared to if you were to try to do that type of work today. It would be a certain cost. We've reduced that cost by doing it more efficiently on the exterior of the building, but there still is significant cost there, and so the cost is still the challenge.
So it's more cost effective. Your system is a lot more cost effective than doing it the traditional way. That's what you're saying, right?
Right.
It'd be much more cost effective. Yeah. So if I'm an investor and I want have this old building, this would totally make sense.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I can absolutely see that.
And even with Section 8 vouchers and choice vouchers and all of that, I mean, if you have those organizations that own that type of property, I think this makes sense for preservation of those properties.
Well, yes. And I've always been amazed. You think of New York City, I didn't realize you think about those brick buildings, there's really no insulation. And so you hear about people being overcome by the heat when it's really, really hot outside, and it's like, well, why don't they just turn their air on? Well, some of those buildings probably don't have air. And then the same thing with heat, and it's like, oh my gosh. So what you're wanting to do makes complete sense. Like Chris said earlier, we're in the middle of Kansas, so we don't have a lot of, at least in McPherson, we don't have a lot of big apartment buildings with, 100 people living in them, but you get to Topeka and Wichita, and they have some of those. And again, those buildings are getting old. So
yeah, I think we have one. Well, we have a couple, but not
anywhere near.
Nothing compared to what they would have in New York City. Those big skyscrapers. We don't have all that.
Yeah. It's a challenge everywhere. The aging building stock is a challenge everywhere, and what to do with these old buildings. I mean, with smaller buildings, it becomes a little bit more feasible to demolish it and build a new one. At some point, you see, old homes. At some point, someone buys it and knocks it down and builds a new house on the property. It's a little bit more manageable and feasible to do that, and that stock kind of can change over time. But with larger buildings, just demolishing it is way more difficult. And so with bigger buildings like we have a lot of here, you pretty much never see them getting demolished.
Yeah.
And you're really more kind of stuck with them in a different kind of way.
So what's your long-term plan? I mean, after you get going, are you hoping to spread it across the United States? Are you hoping to find partners somewhere who are like, this is the coolest idea? I mean, maybe if you're in Chicago or Los Angeles or these bigger cities that have skyscrapers and larger communities, are you hoping to be able to do that at some point? I'm always the person who looks way forward, right? I'm already 20 steps ahead and everybody else is still trying to catch up. That's how my brain, unfortunately for me, unfortunately for them, that's how my brain works. So what's the long-term plan? I mean, this sounds like it could really be a solution to save a lot of those homes that were built in the 70s and 80s that are really in very, very in disrepair. So,
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. I mean, one of the challenges with buildings in general is they're all different, right? They're all so unique. It's very hard to say, here's one solution that works for this building and just take it and, use it for all these other buildings, because just the conditions of buildings vary so much, the shape varies so much, that there's just so many, it's very hard to kind of generalize. But that's one good thing about this type of building that we're targeting, these larger public housing building stock is that they are so similar. So we have literally, tens of thousands of these kind of buildings just in New York. But like you said, big cities across the country all have the same kind of typology for a lot of their public housing and affordable housing. So, our goal is to kind of create this new approach and then have it be easily replicable for all these people in all these other places. So, we do our first pilot project and people see, how it works. They see how you do it. We're going to document everything very closely so that people can learn from it. And the idea is that people can now start implementing it in communities across the country that have similar types of buildings.
I would think HUD would be very interested in this plan.
I would think so
because
too.
The goal really is to not only build new, but to preserve that housing stock. Why would they not? You need to call them. I don't know how that works, but
So you mentioned that they've done this a little bit over in Europe. So do you have any comparisons of before they did it and afterwards on maybe the utility bills or the energy efficiency or any of that you could share with us?
I mean, I don't have, numbers off the top of my head specifically, but, happy to share some information after the call. I can send you some information if you're interested. The putting new facades on an existing building is something that they've done, and there's good data on. Putting the HVAC in the facade the way we're doing it, that's very new. So there's no kind of data out there on that necessarily. Although there is another project, it's called Eva White. The name of the building is Eva White. It's in the Boston area. And I don't believe it's completed yet, but it's very close to completion, where they actually took an approach pretty similar in many ways to the approach we're doing, where they put this new facade on the building. They ran new duct and pipe infrastructure within that facade. And there should be data on that, soon. I would assume once the building is completed, once the retrofit is complete and up and running, I think a lot of that is going to be very public data. So that'll be very interesting for, really the whole building community to look at.
Yeah, that will be. Like I said, this is just a whole new way of thinking about preserving older buildings. Do you see that AI could play a part in making this a little cheaper, a little quicker? Do you see any of that technology coming?
I think it can definitely help. At the end of the day, construction maybe isn't as affected by AI as obviously as some other industries. Because, ultimately we need people there putting physical things together. Until there's robots to do that work, still a lot of the kind of cost and complexity is in just the manual labor that has to be done on site. And, AI can't necessarily get us around that. But AI can help with a lot of things that can make the whole process more efficient, kind of the project management side of things, estimating side of things.
Manufacturing.
I
was thinking about manufacturing. I mean, are these manufactured somewhere? How do you put them together? Because I would think AI could help with putting the pieces together. Maybe I don't know, but
I mean that's one of the angles that we're leveraging with this approach is prefabrication. So instead of doing all of this on site, sending steel and copper and insulation and all these things to the site and having people assemble it on site, to prefabricate these panels in a factory, so that the only work you're doing on site mostly is just hanging those prefabricated panels on site. And so you're absolutely right that once you move that work to the factory, away from the job site, it unlocks the ability to bring a lot more technology into the process. And ultimately, if you think of a car factory with all these robotic arms, making the cars and, how efficiently it does that, there's the potential for the construction industry in general and, including retrofits to look more like that. The challenge is that you really need scale to do that. There's a lot of investment that has to go into a factory like that. And if it's just for a few projects here and there, can't really justify an investment like that. But if you can get it going at a good scale, then it can start to justify those investments. And we can start to make construction look a lot more modern, a lot more technology in the process.
Yeah, I can really imagine if you had a factory and you were really able to sell this product, which I think it's an incredible product myself.
I do too. I love it.
You could really quickly start moving some stuff. That's pretty exciting.
So Chris and I just took a tour a week or so ago at a place that's building houses, and they're actually putting the walls together in sections in a factory, and they put all the wood into this machine, and it cuts exactly what they want, size-wise and everything. And they said it really cut down on the amount of waste. Like they barely fill up a dumpster, in a week's time, and because there's just no waste. And so I could see where, that kind of thing, if you can get it all automated to where you just basically put in what you're needing for that building, it cuts it gets all put together.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. Okay, when you go to New York, because it's not a real small, it's not a real big place.
I think I'm going to New York City, actually.
I want you to look up David and go look at this building.
I know you live an hour away from here. Can you just drive on over?
Go look at this building.
Not like Kansas, where you just jump in the car and you're 100 miles and whatever. But yeah.
Well, I'll definitely recommend some good pizza and bagel places.
Oh, yay.
Oh, there you go.
That'll be awesome. Yes, I'm very excited. It'll be our first trip. I've never been to New York.
Yeah.
Been lots of places, but I'm really excited about it. But anyway, so this has been really great. I really appreciate it. And I will tell our audience that if you're really interested in this, if you have questions for David or anything that you want to ask, you can reach out to him where? Tell them where they can reach out to you, email or whatever you're comfortable, website. Do you have something where somebody could reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, our website is www.hydronicshell.com, so you can check it out there. Welcome to email me. My email is D as in David Goldstein, Goldstein @hydronicshell.com. So certainly welcome to email me. I love hearing from folks and talking to them. Just like this conversation is fun and interesting. So happy to hear from anyone, answer questions. Always love doing that.
And if you want to ask us a question about this on air, we can always check with David, and then we can ask. We love questions that we can ask on air or answer for you. So make sure that you ask these questions. It's important that we all learn together when these new technologies come about. Yeah. Because it's the only way we're going to get rid of this housing situation that we have. We've all got to work together and move forward.
Well, and we can't afford to tear everything down that's old. We have to figure out how to recover it, rework it so that it keeps it affordable for people and they can live there safely and comfortably and have the heat and air AC that they need. The temperatures are not getting better. They're getting higher and lower all over the country. So, So I just appreciate you, David, coming on and being willing to talk with us about this. So I'm just going to say, if you want to know more about this, by all means, reach out to David. He gave you the contact information, or get a hold of us. We'll be happy to pass that to you as well. If you know somebody or you would be interested yourself in being on our podcast, Housing for Good, drop us a line, leave us a review, ask us a question.
Please ask us a question.
And you can do all of that at housingforgood@mcphersonhc.org.
And have a great day.